Very warm welcome to all participants today. Today's seminar on generative AI for academia and business in the age of ChatGPT. Today we have the opportunity to explore how this technology is transforming academia as well as the business. We encourage each of you to actively participate in this webinar and pose your thought-provoking questions through the Q&A window of this Zoom session. It is my privilege to introduce Professor Radhakrishnan Pillai with an illustrative career in the field of information systems. Professor Pillai currently serves as a head of the Center of Innovation and Digital Transformation, and he was also the former Dean of IMK. His expertise and leadership have made a significant impact in the digital transformation as well as in innovation. We are honored to have Professor Pillai with us today to deliver the welcome address.
Good evening, everyone. I am Radhakrishnan Pillai. At the beginning, on behalf of the Center for Digital Innovation and Transformation, I extend a very warm welcome to each one of you. I really appreciate your presence. I see, very enthusiastic response to our webinar announcement. First of all, let me thank each one of you for making. Today, we have a very distinguished expert in this area to talk about generative AI for academia and business in the age of ChatGPT, Dr. Vibhanshu Abhishek. On behalf of the Center and IIM Kozhikode, I extend a very warm welcome to Dr. Vibhanshu. Today, we also have with us Mr. Siddhant Mishra, Professor Vidushi Pandey, and Professor M.B. Sebastian. I would like to thank Mr. Siddhant and Professor Vidushi for facilitating this event. I also would like to thank Mr. Smith Elani for coordinating this event. The center was established about 2 years back to facilitate research and development and also training in the area of digital transformation. And this webinar is one of the events organized by the center. Once again, I would like to thank each one of you for making to this webinar. We look forward to having a very interesting session by Dr. Vibhanshu. Thank you very much.
Thank you
so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Pillai. It's a pleasure to be here, and I see the participant count going up. So not to try to take any pressure, but thanks for this opportunity. This is a topic that's very, very close to my heart. So much so that I've taken a break from academics. I've been a professor. I've taken a break from academics to work on this idea where I think it's a big impact. So let me dive right into the presentation. But please keep your questions coming. I'll try to address them as possible, but definitely towards the end, would love to have an engaging discussion with all of you. So without any further ado, let me get started. I hope you guys can see my screen okay now. Right?
Yes.
So we'll talk about generative AI more broadly, but of course, all of this has come into public prominence because of the recent launch of ChatGPT. And I would say ChatGPT has become old news because now we have GPT-4. So every day we hear about something new in this particular field. And it's fascinating, the rate of change. It seems like everyone in the world is working on it. So let me try to shed some light on what this phenomena is all about. And I feel that it has big implications for both education and business. And we'll try to tease that out towards the end. Quick background about myself. I've been doing AI machine learning for many years. Did my undergrad from IIT Kanpur in computer science. Then I was a PhD student at Wharton, where my PhD was in operations and information management. So I've been examining the impact of technology on markets, and specifically using machine learning models to solve business problems. After that, I was a faculty at Carnegie Mellon, and then a couple of years ago, I moved to UC Irvine. So that's been my day job, being an academic, teaching courses on AI and NLP. But I've also been involved very closely with the startup world, with big Fortune 100 firms. And last year, the entrepreneurial bug took over, and I decided to start Alltius with Sid, who's my co-founder here. And maybe we'll get some time at the end to talk about what we are doing at Alltius. I'm sure all of you have seen ChatGPT. I don't think I need to introduce ChatGPT to any of you, but let me play around a little bit with how this system works, and then we'll proceed from here on. So ChatGPT can do many things. One of the when I used to be a professor, I used to ask these questions in my AI and machine learning class. This was for extra bonus points. Write a haiku about something, and you can read a haiku about. Haiku is a 7-word poem, right? It's difficult to write, especially difficult to write something meaningful. But if I ask ChatGPT to write a haiku about itself, it says, "Intelligent bot, ChatGPT is always learning, endless conversation." I think this is a meaningful haiku for anyone who is into this kind of stuff. If I ask it to write a poem about generative AI and how to change the world, it gives you a very interesting poem of how ChatGPT is going to change the world, or generative AI is going to change the world. So, these are some simple things that we can do using ChatGPT. What is really fascinating to me is we have been trying out how to use this as a tutor teaching assistant. And I'll post a prompt here very quickly in the interest of time, not spend too much time on it. But if I tell ChatGPT you're a data science professor, create and deliver 5-module course on Intro to Machine Learning, offer the modules progressively, and ask 3 MCQ questions after every module. So essentially, I'm asking it to pretend to be a professor and, in a very sequential manner, tell me about topics in machine learning and ask me questions to judge my level of understanding, right? And it says, okay, introduction to machine learning, it gives me all of these questions, and it's giving me an MCQ thing. However, I can sort of say, so ChatGPT is a little bit slow today, but please bear with me. So it offers a very deep level of interactivity, right? If I get stuck somewhere, if I don't understand something, I can ask it a question. And typically, this is something that would be done by a tutor in a course, right? And the tutor only has so much time and so much patience, but this is like an infinitely patient, and it has infinite amount of time to interact with every individual student. So we've been trying out how this can be applied in the tutor setting with some of the partners that we are working at. On the EdTech side, we're trying this at University of California of how this can be used as a tutor or a student advisor. So now let me go back to the presentation. Right. So what else it can do? It can do many things, right? I showed you some examples. It can give relationship advice. Hopefully, you're not following any relationship advice from ChatGPT. It can write and debug code. I already showed you how it can teach machine learning. It can play a murder mystery game. And this is only ChatGPT. GPT-4 can do even more things. And in fact, there's recent research from Microsoft that shows that not only is GPT-4 intelligent, but it also has common sense, given some standard benchmarks of what intelligence means and what does it mean to have common sense. So it's come a long way. These systems are no longer dumb, and some people propose that they have initial sparks of artificial general intelligence, which is having intelligence similar to human beings, right? Now, taking one step back, generative AI. So ChatGPT is part of this broader scheme of things called generative AI. And specifically, generative AI is a way that artificial intelligence can create new data that is not based on pre-existing data or inputs. So a lot of AI so far has been what we call predictive AI, which is trying to predict labels for certain types of consumers, certain types of rows or pieces of information. However, generative AI is trying to create new things that have never existed before. And I think that's the fundamental difference in computing that generative AI is bringing about. And that opens up many possibilities, particularly in the realm of creativity, right? You can write poems, you can write books, you can generate images. And so if you look at what are the different types of generative AI tools out there, we have generative AI that produces images, text we already saw from ChatGPT. It can generate code. We also have some tools that can generate videos. It's not as good yet now, but I think it's improving exponentially. And then we have generative AI that can produce music, right? So all of the things that we would have said even like 3-4 years ago that computers could not do, they're able to do today. They're able to write books. They're able to create images, high definition images that I'm going to show you. They're able to create videos and music. So very much in the creativity domain. This is an image generated using a tool called Midjourney. And so it can create very hyper-realistic images. And this is something that a photographer would have spent a lot of time trying to time and pose and take this. Like this would be even difficult taking this image in the middle of the ocean, right? But now you can just generate this image in high definition. So this is the state of the art. It's not okay or marginal, but it's as good as probably some of the best creators in a specific domain. Here, if you can hear the music. Can you hear the music? Let me. For some reason, it's asking me a password. I think I'll skip the music, but there is a piece of music that AI has created just by text prompts. And so, I can just say, this is the kind of music I want to produce. It should be set in this theme. This is the background score I need. And it can auto-generate this music completely by itself. And so this is what I was talking about, is there's a fundamental shift in how AI applications have been built in the past and how AI applications will be built in the future, right? Or increasingly more in the future. When we think about predictive AI, most of the time, the goal is to label a particular data point. So for example, predict whether an image contains offensive content. Whereas with generative AI, the goal is to output a new data point, right? So you want to output an image, you want to output a piece of prose, or an answer to a question like we are trying to do at Alltius. And what this leads to is a dramatic shift in the type of AI applications. A lot of AI applications so far have been built on tasks that have seemed very mundane, right? So people have been doing this in a very, very repetitive fashion. And can we automate some of these tasks, right, using machine learning? Where we are moving towards now is we're going to see an emergence of applications of AI where we are employing AI to do creative tasks. So write posts on social media, create music, create lyrics for songs, create paintings. So these are things that have not been in the bastion of AI, and those are the kinds of areas that we'll see emerging going on from here. Now, taking one step back and trying to figure out, I hopefully have gotten me excited about, how the shift in AI is happening. So of course, AI has been hot for the last decade, I would say. I've personally been working in AI for the last 30 years or so, or last 25 years at least. No, so for me, it's not like an overnight thing that has come about to be true. But at least in the last decade, we have seen a lot of emphasis on AI. But in the last 6 months, we have seen even more emphasis on AI, particularly around generative AI. So taking one step back, like double clicking on how some of these models work, it's fairly simple how something like ChatGPT is trained. So without getting into too much math, the intuition behind this is I have a lot of text that exists on the internet, right? So there's a piece of text, second law of robotics. A robot may obey the orders, blah, 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 right? So this is a piece of text that exists on the internet. The way these models are trained is fairly simple. They are prediction machines. So they say, given a set of words, what is the word that should appear next, right? That's how they are trained. So it says second law of robotics, what's the next word that should appear? Correct output is A, right? And so that's how the neural network is getting trained. Second training is second law of robotics, A, which is the next word that should appear? That's robot. And so on and so forth, right? So what it does, it sees a bunch of text that precedes, and then it says, what's the next word? So this is what we call next token prediction, right? Seems fairly simple, right? Like just look at all the text on the internet and say, what should appear next? I'm building a probability model. That is what we call a language model. And if we train that, it's definitely going to be able to predict what should come next, given all the words that preceded, right? Now, the interesting thing that happens is when you have a very complex network with many neurons, we start seeing these emergent properties, right? So it's been trained to predict the next token, but it starts having intelligence, right? Like GPT-4 has some level of intelligence and some level of common sense. And it's not specifically programmed to have intelligence. Just because the complexity of the network, we start seeing this emergent behavior. And at the very basic level, what is happening is there is a deep learning network that is just trying to make predictions of what should come next. Very similar to some of the models that people have built for many years, like, is this image contain a cat or a dog, right? And this is saying this particular image contains a cat, this particular image contains a dog. So we have taken very similar deep learning networks and modified the network structure a little bit to solve this next token prediction problem. But given the number of nodes that appear, it starts having these properties and seems to be intelligent, right? And I'll show you the progression of how these models have evolved over time. Very specifically, because this intelligence has emerged due to a particular architecture, which is what we call the transformers, right? So this is the core of any type of language model that we use, whether it is ChatGPT or it's some of the models that Google has created, or many other companies are trying to create models around large language models. This is the basic architecture, which is you input a bunch of text and encode it into a particular language. And then we create an embedding. So think of this as an embedding is a semantic representation of what is being said, right? So if I have a sentence in French here, Je suis étudiant, this is a sentence in French. I want to create a semantic, very high dimensional representation of what does this sentence mean. And then what I want to do is convert this into a different language, right? So convert this into English, for example. So there is a decoder that takes this embedding and converts this into an output. Now, what this was actually originated by Google. So Google was trying to have this product called Google Translate, where you could enter text in one language and it would convert that text into a different language. But if I have this system, I don't only have the ability to convert from one language to another. I can give it one sentence and say what sentence should precede this. So when I'm training the network, I can use the same architecture to say, here is one sentence, what's the next sentence? And then given that sentence, I feed it back into the network and then ask it to give me the next sentence. Yeah. So, I can ask it to do many, many different things, right? And this is the genesis of what we see in ChatGPT, right? So at a very basic level, this is what is happening. I take a sentence, create a representation of this in a very high dimensional space, and then generate the next sentence, right? But this is a very powerful architecture that has led to some of the advances that have come about in the recent years. Just for illustration, I'm also keeping a track of time, is the field has advanced at an astonishing pace, right? So in 2018, we had the first paper on this transformers by Google called BERT. That's also when GPT was launched. GPT actually was not the best model. BERT was much, much better at that point in time. It had about 117 million parameters. So if you think of the neural network, those were the number of parameters that were supposed to be trained. Now we have, in 5 years, we have gone to a 6th order magnitude increase in the complexity of the network, right? So GPT-4 has 1,000 trillion parameters. And if you see the progression, I think from GPT to GPT-2, there wasn't much advance except they added more nodes and became a little bit better. But one inflection point came in 21 when with 127 billion parameters, you started getting human-like responses, right? So you could not, like, if you think of the Turing test, which sort of tries to understand if on the other side it's a computer or a human being, it started passing the Turing test. So you couldn't recognize that you're not talking to a human being. And then we had ChatGPT, which was taking the same model and training it through human coders. So saying this is a good answer or a bad answer, right? And then we moved to GPT-4 in just a couple of months, which was making that multimodal. So it started from text, but now it can understand images, it can understand videos. And that's why it needs to have so many more parameters to be able to process multimedia data. So what can GPT-4 do? It can pass most of the standardized tests. It can pass the bar exam. Definitely, I don't recommend hiring a GPT-4 lawyer, but it can pass most of the standardized tests in the US. And we can see the difference from GPT 3.5 to GPT-4, right? Like in a matter of few months, when it was not passing some of these tests, now it has gone to 80% accuracy on some of these tests, right? So very quick advancement. The big question from a business perspective is, so what, right? How, like, of course, it can do all of these cool things, but what is the big impact? I think this is a very interesting question because before the GPT series models, we were talking about how we can get a small increase in efficiency, right? So if you're processing claims, how can you reduce the number of fraudulent payouts by a certain number of percentage, 3%, 4%, 10% at the max? Can you process your mortgage claims, mortgage applications a little bit faster, right? Can we get 20%, 30% increase in efficiency? So typically in traditional machine learning, like Sid and I used to work for this company called Revigo, where we are trying to increase the fuel efficiency by 5%, right? And so a lot of applications of machine learning so far has been, how can we get a single or a double-digit increase in efficiency? Now, what we're really talking about is a few times increase in productivity. Can we take a customer service rep and increase the productivity 5x? Can we take a copywriter and increase the productivity 10x, right? So it's a fundamental shift in how we're thinking about the application of AI and the potential impact. And especially this impact is not on mundane work that I talked about earlier, but on really creative tasks, white collar jobs that we thought even a little while ago would not be disrupted by technology, right? So I think the first wave is going to be definitely how can we increase the efficiency of most of these knowledge workers? And then maybe there are long-term consequences of what happens to the workforce in the future. So some examples of this, at Alltius, we are creating these self-service assistants called No, where you can go and ask questions and get answers to help-related or support-related questions very, very quickly. It's a big problem. One of the first things that can get disrupted by things like generative AI. And we are able to offer 100 times faster. It's not 100%, but 100 times faster help, right? What would have taken you a couple of hours, you can now get an answer in a second. with a smaller team size, right? You can reduce your team size to 1/4. So phenomenal increase in quality, but at a fraction of the cost. Similarly, GitHub Copilot, which is a programming interface that GitHub has launched, shows that developer productivity increases at least 2 times when they start using Copilot, right? And with the shortage of developers, you can imagine this is a very big boost in productivity. If your coders can write 2x faster code, you can do a lot more stuff very, very quickly. So we are seeing a lot of these changes happening, right? I can spend like one entire day talking about some of the applications of generative AI, so I'll not get into that. But the other thing I want to touch upon is this is a space that's changing rapidly. So I just took a sample week in generative AI. And then that week, GPT-4 was launched. Microsoft launched Copilot 365, which is their assistant on Microsoft products. The company called Adept, which can create these Copilots for different types of products. Google launched its own generative AI tool. Midjourney, which is the image generation tool, launched a new version of their API. So this is 1 week, and this week is not different from any other week. Like if I look at last week, I'll similarly have 5 big companies launching new products in this space. So it seems like everyone is going after this. And really, there's a little bit of hype, I would say, but there is also a fundamental shift in computing that is happening. And that's why we see so much activity in this area. Now, of course, as an academic, I always have this thing, nothing comes for free, there's no free lunch. And so you see all these big advances happening, there has to be a catch. Especially as an economist, economists have a very pessimistic view of the world. There's always some catch. So what could go wrong? I feel that there is a big problem with bias in training data. So a lot of this data is trained, a lot of these models are trained on the internet data. And for a long time, we have known that the internet data is biased. And these biases translate to the models that we are building. These models are prone to hallucinations, right? So they can spit out something and they seem to be very confident in the answer that they're giving out, but it can be complete BS. And specifically, if you are trying to use them as a repository of knowledge, it doesn't work. So that's one of the problems that we are trying to solve, because it's very important in our use case to not have hallucinations. We want all the answers to be accurate all the time. There is going to be big implications of this for labor markets. People are still trying to figure out, what are the implications. Jeff Hinton has this doomsday prediction about how generative AI is going to change a lot of things in a negative way. I'm more of an optimistic as it comes to some of these technologies, but we are still trying to wrap our heads around how this technology is going to impact labor markets in the short term, medium term, and the long term. And then finally, I think one of the things that I always have felt about is technology is increasing rapidly. And we are getting very little time as individuals or society to adapt to this technology, right? So if you think of, more classical disruptions in technology, we had time for the society or the labor markets to reorganize around these things. However, if you just look at the pace of innovation in this market, we're getting very little time to do that, right? And so I think that is going to lead to a lot of challenges in the short term and probably in the medium term too. And definitely, if you ask ChatGPT or GPT-4 what jobs it will replace in next 2 years, it talks about many things that we would have not considered possible even 2 years ago, like customer service reps, data entry clerk, content writers, right? We haven't thought about this even like 2-3 years back. Translators, proofreaders. I typically use a copywriter. I don't need to use anyone any longer. I can just run things through ChatGPT or GPT-4 to get a more accurate version or maybe a better paraphrase version of what I've written. So a lot of these jobs are white collar jobs, right? So typically we would think about most of the disruption coming for blue collar workforce, but what these language models have shown is really it's the white collar jobs that will get affected by things like generative AI. So a lot of, I would say, frothy waters for the next few years. But here, what I would like to do is, take a pause, maybe show you a quick demo in terms of how we are using generative AI at Alltius. And then I'll sort of touch upon one or two closing points that I have around how I feel this whole area is going to emerge in the next couple of years. So let me share my screen. And I see there are a bunch of questions. So just in a short while, I'll start looking at those too.
Yeah, I think Vibs, a couple of questions would relate to the demo as well. One could be the cost of training a model, right?
Yeah.
On large scale and on a localized scale, and how true and factual can these models get, and how are we addressing that? And we'll address all of these questions.
Yeah. So maybe, let me talk a little bit about what we are doing at Alltius, right? Like I mentioned earlier, we are trying to create these self-service assistant that can be trained on a bunch of content and answer questions about that specific content, right? So that's why we are starting out. We are building these self-service assistant, but these assistants can then eventually be used to do things in the product that they're assistants for, right? So think about a SaaS product. For example, I'm sure all of you use products like Alltius or Tableau for doing data processing. And these products are very difficult to use. And, like even as an expert user, sometimes we struggle with how to use some of these tools or features in the products. And so you can go to Know, a version of Know trained on Tableau, for example, and ask questions about how do I do certain things in Tableau? Or if I'm running into a problem, how can I go and solve that particular issue? And the assistant would be like an oracle on the product that can help you answer that question, debottleneck you, and then move you forward in whatever you're trying to do. So this specific use case, it is very, very important to have the right answers. And it is very important to give control back to the company, right? So we don't want to rely on overall what OpenAI has done or what Google has done to train the model. These are consumers in my product interacting with my product. And I want to have control on what type of content is served to them when they ask a question. And I also want to control the overall experience, right? Of what type of questions they can ask, what happens when they ask a particular question, I'm not able to answer it, or even to do some kind of post-diagnosis on, where are people struggling so that I can make my product better. So one of the biggest things for us is accuracy of the answers. Second is this aspect of control. So you think of any type of open LLM, the data from you is going to train those models for an open LLM, right? And I think we had this breach from Samsung where their engineers was sending code to OpenAI to get answers to some of the problems that they were facing. And then this code was released to the internet, to the entire world, right? And so a lot of their secrets got out. And a lot of companies they want to get the power of these types of tools, but they don't want their data to be publicly shared with open LLMs. So that's what we call trust. We talk about how LLMs are not enterprise ready. And you need to have a lot of trust in these models for them to get deployed. And I think that's the problem that at a high level that we're trying to solve is how do we make them accurate and how do we bring the control back to the enterprise that is using it. Very quickly, I'll touch upon the problem of how easy is it to train. So to train an LLM is very expensive, right? Because an LLM needs to understand the structure of the world. It needs to be able to answer all of these questions in an intelligent manner. It needs to have some sense of comprehension. And then it needs to know all the domain knowledge that is there on the internet, right? And typically training an LLM takes a few $1 million, right? Just in compute cost. However, for a lot of applications, you don't have to actually go and train an LLM. What you need to do is customize the LLM to solve your specific problem. So I'll sort of show you a quick example of this. So this is sort of the dashboard of Alltius, where you can go and create multiple assistants. And an assistant is nothing but training it on your specific data so that it can answer questions that are pertinent to your data. So we took the liberty of creating an assistant from IMK that's trained only on a few sets of documents, but we can very easily train it on a bunch of documents. So we trained it on Dr. Pillai's profile. We trained it on a few programs at IMK. There's an English report that's not working, but I think we'll push that under the rug for now. So, but you can go here and you can say, okay, I want to train no on a particular website or a bunch of documents. It can be research documents, for example. It can be documents that talk about, for instance, if you think of this from the perspective of a company, you can train it on your help center, you can train it on all your marketing documents, you can train it on your website, so that no has a good understanding of, that context of your product. But the technology is broadly applicable. You can train it on any type of data, and it should be able to answer questions on that type of data. So once you've trained the assistant, which is just add multiple sources, it ingests that and puts that as a part of the knowledge graph. That is where we are doing the training, right? Putting this in the knowledge graph, it constrains the knowledge or the answers to come precisely from the documents that we have trained it on. It doesn't go to the internet to answer those questions. And that's how we are trying to bring the power back to the person who's training these models. So let me go to this here, and let me ask a few questions myself first, and maybe then someone of you can ask a question. So I'm putting Dr. Pillai on the spot here, and hopefully we'll be able to give good answers to these questions. So it's sort of I think this is maybe a little bit dated information on the website where it says Dr. Pillai is the dean of the dean of administration and academic administration at IIM Kozhikode, and he's also a professor, PGP chairperson, chairman of very Smith was saying, very illustrious background for Dr. Pillai. And so let me say what is his research based on. And as Noah is pulling up the answer, it didn't take a lot of time for us to train it, right? Like if you look at the documents that we have put in, it probably takes a few seconds to train it on each of those documents, and very little cost to be able to train it, right? And so you can go from almost nothing, or actually nothing, to getting something that is workable in a few seconds or maybe a few minutes. And I think that is talking about the power of large language models, right? We can deploy some of these things very quickly. Earlier, it would have taken probably a couple of months to be able to answer some of these questions, but now it's able to answer these questions quite quickly. Let me ask a few questions on the PGP programs. I am let me just copy this from, just in the interest of time. And I would love to answer more questions from folks. So let's say if I ask a question about what is the exact program at IMK focused on? So it gives you an answer. So let's say someone lands up on the IMK website, and instead of going through all the content, you ask a question, and very quickly you get an answer to that question, and you can then move on. Let's say I have this question. I'm a program manager in a tech company, and this is the kind of question that you would ask, either someone who has been an applicant or a student at IMK earlier, or maybe someone who's in the admissions team, right? And now you don't need to do that. You can just go and just type this in, and Noah can help you answer this question, right? So hopefully it gives you a sense of, how we can bring some of the power of large language models to a very specific use case where you can have a lot of trust on what is being served to you. So let me go back to the deck very quickly. How are we doing in time? I think we are okay, or maybe I'm over time.
We have like 10 minutes to answer a few questions. And,
okay. So I'll just make one quick point, and then would open this for Q&A. And for some reason, I'm not able to find out where my slide deck is in Zoom. Okay. So, one of the biggest things I feel this generative AI is going to change is it might change the definition of what we call intelligence. And I think there are three distinct phases that we have gone through, right? If you think of the world that existed before internet, memorization was a big skill, right? Even if you think of something like playing chess, this was the epitome of human intelligence, right? How do you play chess? Because you can memorize. The best grandmasters have memorized all the moves, right? They know how all the plays work. And so rote memorization was the key skill to become intelligent. And once internet came about, this information was available at the click of a button, right? So memorization was no longer an important skill. And then it moved to synthesis. How can I look at disparate sources of information, very quickly synthesize it, and do something useful with that? Now, what's happening with tools like generative AI and specifically the large language models is synthesis comes for free. I can give it a bunch of different documents, and then it can synthesize that information and do it very succinctly, right? Some example I showed you just a little bit ago. And so I think there's going to be a fundamental shift in what we call, as human beings call, intelligence, right? And of course, this is my take on it, which can be completely wrong. But I think the definition of intelligence would move from synthesis to creativity. How do I put together seemingly disparate pieces of concepts or information and do something interesting with that, right? How can a biochemist put something from music together and create a certain kind of protein because of his little bit of understanding of music, his understanding of biochemistry, but really AI helping him to synthesize all of this thing together, right? So I think there'll be not only a shift that we have talked about in labor markets and all of this, but a fundamental shift in what we actually call human intelligence, right? This is just sort of my take on it. Take it with a pinch of salt, might be completely incorrect. And of course, these generative then open the floor for any questions. I think there are many, many questions here. So we'll try to address all of them as we go along.
Yeah, we could start with a few. We can take it theme by theme. Professor Pandey, if it's okay, I just made a few notes. If you want, you can also shoot away a few questions.
Yeah, please.
Right, so let's address the elephant in the room, right? Things about the model itself. How much does a large-scale model cost, and how do we master prompt engineering, right? So something about models. There are a couple of questions over there.
Yeah. Right. So like I said, if you want to train an LLM from scratch, it takes a few $1 million, but something like this is, depending on the type of content you're training it on, is fairly reasonable, right? So for 1 gigabyte of data, probably it will cost you maybe a few $100 to train some of these models, right? And you're not training an LLM, but basically what you're doing is trying to customize the LLM to your specific use case, right? So that's fairly reasonable. What is expensive is sometimes the inference cost is quite expensive, which is the generation of the answer itself is expensive, right? So if you think about ChatGPT, for example, that cost is, if you run your workflow through ChatGPT, it's going to be like 3 to 4 cents for every question answered, right? Which says that in a lot of use cases, you can't use ChatGPT for customer support. But there are many architectures that you can use to actually reduce the cost by a magnitude, right? So for example, if you use No, your costs are typically of the order of 0.1 to 0.2 cents for every question answered, right? So there are, there are companies in this space that have been trying to make this more efficient. I was talking to a startup yesterday that's trying to make image generation 5 times cheaper by optimizing the libraries and everything, right? So again, early days, the training cost for specific use cases is not significant, but the inference cost is. But there are solutions in the market that can help you achieve lower costs that might be commercially viable.
Yeah. Few questions around the derived intelligence. So how does ChatGPT or any other relevant model understand vernacular, right? So I think you addressed it, but if you could.
Yeah, I'll give you a skeptical answer to this. So, no one knows, not even Sam Altman knows why it does what it does. Like I said, it's trained on one very specific task, which is next token prediction. Given a bunch of text, can it predict something else? And of course, you can use this on any language. So as long as that content is available on the internet, it can be trained on that particular vernacular, right? So it can do, like, if you ask a question in English, it gives you an answer in English, but if you ask a question, let's say in Tamil, for example, I don't know if Tamil is supported by ChatGPT or not, but Spanish, for example, or French, it will give you an answer in French. But the original content doesn't have to come from French. It can be content in English, right? So it understands this translation precisely because that was the origin of these types of transformers. That's what Google created the transformer model to be able to do. So it's fairly comfortable in moving or switching from one language to another, given that it's been trained on data from that particular language. I think OpenAI supports 59 languages. There are some other models that support even more. But yeah, there is, hopefully that answers your question.
Great. And I think these are like Lego blocks, right? There's a translation layer, there's a sentence completion layer, both together also create magic, right? There are a few sort of philosophical questions, but there are questions around how does it understand context? How can it get empathy that a customer support agent would give, right? Would this not create more income inequality going forward? So what's your take on, how this would?
So I think there are a few different questions. I'll sort of say, let me answer the easier questions first, right? So how can we develop it to have empathy, right? And that just comes from the prompt engineering, because it is trained to write prose in a certain way. I can say, give an answer to this question, but be like an empathetic customer support agent, right? And the beauty of this is scalable, right? You have to train your agents to be empathetic, right? At least some of them, right? Because empathy is probably a skill that is not as common as we would like to believe, right? So I feel that some of these things are easier to do with these models, and in fact, you can give it a persona that you really want just by writing the right prompt, right? Whereas you have to train your customer support agent for a long time to have those skills or traits, especially given that there's so much churn in customer support agent. So some of those problems are going to be much easier to solve with things like generative AI. Now, the more difficult problems about income inequality, right? I think, I'm trying to wrap my head around it, and I've been talking to a lot of scholars in this area about what happens to income equality. There's this interesting paper by Eric Brynjolfsson that just came out, which talks about how generative AI is increasing the productivity of call center agents by 14%, but really it's the bottom of the pyramid that's improving, or not bottom of the pyramid, but the low performing agents are becoming better more than the high performing agents, right? So it's actually reducing the gap between them. I've heard similar anecdotes from programmers who say, I've been a star programmer, I've been this 10x programmer for a long time, but now someone who's not very good can just use Copilot to become, at least much closer to the level that I'm at. So there have been talks, anecdotal evidence, at least, in how the gap is going to reduce. But I also have been talking to folks in the creative industry who say, the person who's the best in this industry can do now 10 times more work, because they can start from, like, instead of writing an entire chapter, they can ask ChatGPT to write a chapter by giving them the right prompt, and then they can very quickly go over that and make it look better. Like, people have been publishing children's book, for example, in the last few months, just using ChatGPT. So I think it's not really, it depends on the kind of field that you're in, and we have to still double click on exactly what's the impact on a specific type of task. So I think it will, in the short term, there will be these moving pieces. Again, like, as an optimist, not as an economist, like I said, economists are a little bit pessimistic, but as an optimist who believes in technology, I think in the long term, people will need to do much less work because everyone will become more productive. And I think in general, that will be better for society. Like, if you have to work less and can produce the same amount of output, I think in general, that's good for the society and for every individual, right? So, but again, that's a prediction that is 10 years out, 20 years out. I don't know how it's going to play out. But I would like to believe that the world becomes a better place in the future.
Yeah, we'll just do a couple of more themes. There's one theme around, there's already established fact that large language models are trained on internet data, but what are some of these micro applications like ours trained on? What are the safeguards against privacy breaches, right? And yeah, can it also ingest private information when it comes to company information, right? Something that's not already outside, but can it answer from private information?
Right. So yes, I think the answer to all of those things is yes. So one is you can train it on. So depends on where you're running the LLM. If you're running this on OpenAI, definitely it's very difficult to preserve privacy because you don't know how OpenAI is using that information to retrain its model. So if that is of concern, then you want to bring the LLM in-house, right? Either with a provider that is giving you that capability to, have it under some level of security that you can authenticate, or bring it inside in the company. So bring it inside is technically challenging. And so you should do it only if it is meaningful enough to, like TCS or Infosys or a big tech company should be doing it. But I don't think that's a solution for every company, right? So that's how you come around the security or privacy problem. On training on your data, definitely it's possible, right? If you have, let's say if you're a company like Swiggy, for example, who has a lot of questions that people have asked, order information, recipes, whatnot, you can create your own LLM from scratch and train it on all your data. That's definitely possible. But even for smaller data set, right, the examples that I showed you, you don't have to retrain the entire LLM, but what you need to do is modify the knowledge graph, right? And that's what we call hybrid LLMs. I think that's a new terminology in this space, which is you're using the power, the comprehension ability, the writing ability of an LLM, but using the data that is owned by you, right? So what are some applications? There are some very interesting applications, like I talked about customer support. There's a company called Jasper that is using this for copywriting, right? So I can write blog posts, I can write articles, I can write books, customized specifically for writing, prose and all of this stuff. Works better than ChatGPT or GPT-4 in many cases. There are companies around generating images. So Midjourney is such a company, right, that creates images. There are a few other companies trying to create videos, trying to create, like, from text. You can render an entire video just if you give it a prompt. There are companies that you can feed it a few images and feed it your voice, and then it will create a video in your voice. So think about demo videos, for example. You can do some of those things. So of course, there are many, many applications, and there is a model that's trained on external data, but you can apply your data to it to get something usable for your specific use case. So definitely, I think that's the general trend in this market. Sid, I hope that answers those set of questions.
Yeah, and we'll just take one last theme here. I'll just combine 4 or 5 points. People are asking about the future, right? Firstly, from their own personal perspective, and like, how do companies adopt this? Personally, what they're asking is, creativity seems to be at risk, right? How do we, as blue collar and white collar workers, stay relevant in this age, right? How do we get started? If I want to experiment, how do I learn about prompt engineering, right? And so many companies are coming up offering solutions in this space. Will this be like a dusting experiment, or will there be like place and prize for everyone in the next 2-3 years?
Right. So so let me offer again, these are all conjectures, right? And a lot of this is opinion and not maybe some evidence from, some signals that I'm picking up that I'm piecing together to answer these questions. But I would say everything I say you should take with a pinch of salt. I've personally been working in AI for the last 25 years. I have never been so excited, and someone who's working on technology for many years also, right? I've never been so excited about any technology because from my perspective, I think of generating AI as being a fundamental shift in computing and in how computing works. Almost as big a shift as the internet brought about, or the fire brought about in the human civilization. So I think this is a big inflection point. What that means is the future from here on is going to be very uncertain, right? So no matter what happens in the future, it's going to look very different from now to 5 years from now. In fact, when we started building Alltius, no one was talking about generative AI. Like when we used to talk about what we're doing at Alltius and we used to talk about generative AI, people's eyes will glaze over and they'll like, what are these guys even talking about? And in a matter of months, right, from December when ChatGPT was launched to now, it's been like 4 months, I would believe. There has been like every day or every other day, there is some big release from a big company in the space, right? Whether it is companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, or it is even companies like, Expedia, Adobe, that are sort of more old school companies. So like everyone is on this bandwagon now. So there is a lot of hype, but there's also a lot of uncertainty, and that's why everyone wants to get on the bandwagon. But having said that, I feel there is a fundamental shift in computing, and that will lead to a very different world from the world that we exist in today, right? Which direction, I think, I, being an optimist, to say, in the long term, everything will work out. But in the midterm is sort of where the frothiness is there in the market. I think the other question is, as knowledge workers, should we be threatened for our jobs? I feel in the short term, not, because, it will take times for employers, companies, societies to adapt to what is happening and how to really, like, people are just trying to understand how to apply these things. So I think one advice that I offer to students is be ahead of the curve, right? Try to master these tools and use them for your own effectiveness. And how can you write better? How can you do things faster? How can you create slides better? Like a lot of the slides in the deck that I presented were creating using Midjourney and some of these other things, right? So how can you use it to your advantage in the short term, right? And see where this technology is going. It will become an integral part of our day-to-day lives. This is something that I've been talking to a lot of folks at UC, right? UC is probably one of the biggest public university systems in the world, if not the biggest. And, everyone has every dean or every provost has a certain different view on how this is going to impact education. And a lot of them have been very reactive to this, which is, okay, how should we not use GPT? How should we ban GPT usage in classrooms? And I'm like, that ship has sailed. Like, we have passed that point. You cannot control this thing. So now you should be thinking about how to actually incorporate this in the coursework, right? And what I did in the last few years is actually use the GPT type models to push my students to do more. Because now they have this assistant that can help them, right? They don't have to come to me, or they don't have to go to the TA to get these questions answered. So how can we really push them, the limit of what they can do? So I think that is a theme that I think should be adopted in most industries. And personally, I would say, try to use these tools. Don't be scared of them, because that ship has sailed. Like, we can't say, let's, like Elon Musk was saying, let's stop developing generative AI for the next 6 months. I think that means nothing. And so this world has happened, and now we have to adapt to that world. So I would sort of leave it at that instead of belaboring the point. I think we're at time, but happy to answer. This is an engaging discussion, so happy to answer a few more questions.
Yeah, actually, over to you, Professor Pandey and Professor Pillai.
Thank you, Professor. Now we have Professor Vibhanshu Pandey, a distinguished faculty member and the area chair of information systems. With a wealth of knowledge and experience, Professor Vibhanshu has contributed immensely to the field of information systems. And today we have the privilege of having Professor Vibhanshu with us to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Smith, and thank you, Professor Vibhanshu. Thank you, Siddharth, for taking so much of time out for us. And I think we are just scratching the surface. There are so many questions from all of us. So we have just scratched the surface. It was very informative. And we would like to continue this engagement so that we keep learning more about it. I think I remember one of the very famous lectures by Professor Andrew Ng some time ago was that AI is the new electricity. And they had presented that it's mostly ANI now, AGI, artificial general intelligence, is far away. And he had suggested that how we can use ANI and the applications. But now I think AI is going to become air, water, everything, the way it's going and changing everything around us. So definitely quite informative, and thanks a lot for sharing your time and expertise with us. Looking forward to more. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was our pleasure. Thanks for giving us this opportunity. And please feel free to reach out to either of us, both of us. I would love to continue this conversation.
Sure, sure. Thank you.
Thank you
If
very much.
one of us or of us research scholars or any audience wants to get in touch with you or get in contact to continue the conversation, would you like to share anything?
Yeah, please feel free. Like I'm at website alltius.ai. So it's VIBS at ALLTIUS.ai. Just feel free to send a note and happy to connect with you.
Thank you so much.
No. Cool. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you,
We'll
everyone.
continue the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Have a nice day, everyone.
Right.
Thank
You
you.
too.